Hello, my name is Jacob Averett. This is my biomechanics final presentation. I've been sick all week, so if I sound a little funky, please bear with me. But jumping right in to my presentation is over rotational versus anti-rotational versus sagittal plane core exercises and their effects on core muscle thickness, spinal stability, and spinal flexibility. So jumping right into the sagittal plane exercises. So the sagittal plane is any movement going forwards and backwards. Forwards and backwards is the sagittal plane. So these movements are the most common by the general population. Obviously, you will go to any gym in the world and you will see sit-ups, crunches, a toe touch, anything like that. If I ask a kindergartner to do a sit up, they'll pretty much know what a sit up is. So sagittal plane core exercises have the shortest movement arm. As the picture shows, the chest is right beside the abdomen, which is your center of gravity. So there is a extremely short distance there. So it is agreed upon by the Oliver and Olivia Lozano articles that has the greatest stimulation of the rectus femoris muscles. Those are the muscles directly in the front of the abs. And since it is so common, it is a very low barrier of entry. It's great for beginners. I think I started doing crunches when I was 5. So anyone can do them. Yeah. An example, like I said before, crunches, sit-ups, toe touches with the feet elevated. So going into our rotational plane exercises, rotational plane exercises are movements moving in the transverse plane, so circular. Rotation occurs at the hip. It causes angular acceleration. It is actually the most dangerous exercise because anytime your spine is rotating to a great degree, it can be very dangerous depending on the load and the speed at which you are rotating. So these types of exercises use Newton's second law, angular acceleration, moving at an angle. These exercises actually have the greatest increase in external and internal oblique activation. The oblique muscles are the abdominal muscles to the side of the rectus femoris. So they cover more of your rib cage area. And these exercises actually have the greatest increase in spinal flexibility. And that is really the thing about rotational plane exercises. Their greatest strength can be their greatest detriment. It's great for flexibility because you are moving at a deep range, rotating at the hip. But it can be very dangerous because if you load these exercises too quickly, you're moving at a deep range around the hip. So an injury can occur very fast. So some of the articles, the Niwadimi, Granacher, and Cromert all compared sagittal to rotational, and they just looked at it was basically as I laid it out, crunches versus Russian twists. Very common exercises. And it was exactly as stated that when you're trying to target the oblique muscles, rotation is king. But as far as rectus femoris, they're not really doing too much as opposed to the sagittal plane exercises. An article on this that I found was very interesting was the Nakai article. They had a specialized piece of equipment where you would get into it, you'd sit down, and you would try to twist and it would actually not let you. It was a isometric rotational machine. It actually showed that there was less oblique activation compared to the rotational, like the Russian twist. But as far as stability goes and flexibility, it was actually not as good. Flexibility, it was definitely not as good. Stability, it was close, but it wasn't there. I feel like that would be interesting to look at on my own time. It's a very different kind of training I hadn't really thought about. So there was also another article, the Olson article, that used special equipment, and it compared sagittal to rotational because so basically they had this board and it has circular board about a foot and a half big, and it has six wheels on the bottom. You would get in a plank position and you would roll the board away from you and towards you, and that way it was heavily stimulating the erectus femoris, not so much on the obliques. And whenever they had them go in a circular motion for both directions, the obliques were greatly targeted, but the rectus femoris, once again, was not really there. The thing about rotational playing core exercises, I feel like there's a lot of specialty machines that can go with these types. Like I just named two, the board and the anti-rotation or the isometric rotation machine. And I have actually been in a machine that is a loaded rotation, which once again, that can be very dangerous because you can load up 250 pounds twisting at the hip. Just because you can doesn't always mean you should for some populations. So moving right along to the anti-rotational core exercises, the Franco Lopez article states that this is so much safer than the rotational. And that is obviously because there is no rotation at the hip, which rotational, that's its biggest detriment. So you resist the torque in the transverse plane. It uses Newton's first law, preventing unwanted movement, resisting. It had the greatest increase in spinal stability because obviously, whenever you try to resist, you have to be stable. An example is the Pallof press, which is shown. Basically, setting up a Pallof press, you get a band, tie it about chest height, and grab it, two hands, take two or three steps to the side, and press. And really, he would just hold this position. I've seen where you can go forwards and backwards with your hands with the band, but either way, he's just trying to maintain position and stay stable, which is its greatest benefit. So, anti-rotational core exercises train spinal stiffness and bracing. Anytime you're trying to stay stable, you have to keep that brace because, as everyone knows, if you lose your brace in when something's trying to pull you, that is where the injury side can come, right? So this actually had the highest activation on the obliques, which I felt was kind of surprising since there is no movement per se, it's just resisting a movement. And it reduces injury risk by limiting excessive TL rotation, resisting moving at that hip on the axis, right? It is a great exercise. You definitely want to do these before you move in to the rotational exercises because stability before flexibility. Okay. You can be extremely flexible, but if you do not have any stability, that's pretty much where you get hurt, right? Going through a range of motion, that those muscles have to be stable and strong to maintain that position and keep you away from injury, right? So moving on to our practical programming model. And this model is supported by the Sarapkis and Conrad articles. So first off, start with the sagittal plane movements, okay? Your crunches, your sit-ups, gain movement proficiency. And that is for a few different reasons. One would be because very low barrier of entry. I mean, I can do a sit-up right here, right now, right? No special equipment needed, which would be a detriment to a lot of the rotational exercises or even the anti-rotational exercises. Not a lot of people really know what a Pallof press is. Ask the general population what's a Pallof press. They'll look at you crazy. But if you ask, do you know what a crunch or a sit-up is? Obviously, who doesn't? Like a kindergartner would know. And so after we gain movement proficiency in the sagittal plane, we would move in to the anti-rotational. Like I said before, stability above flexibility. I cannot stress that enough. Before you go into a deep range of motion, especially twisting at the hips, where there's just so many injuries that occur from twisting at the hip, all right? So gain stability before you go into rotational movements and end up hurting yourself by loading too fast or moving too fast or loading the weight too fast, right? Definitely do not want to ego lift on a Russian twist. So you would add rotational movements last for power and sport specific transfer. So you could ask any athlete from basically any sport that would include boxing, baseball, tennis, discus throwing, and a million others. Where does the power come from? You know, does it come from your arms? Does it come from your shoulders, your lats? Nope. It comes from the hips. Rotating at the hips and essentially using your whole body with your force or your center of mass behind it. That is where the power comes from. And with great power, there can be great injury. As we've said before, it is the most dangerous, right? It is very interesting to me that, you see a lot of athletes do not just Russian twists, but ball throws and slams and a lot of rotational movements, especially baseball players. But I wonder how often do they do a Pallof press? How often do they do anti-rotational work, Because I feel like there can be a lot of lower back injuries in the sports world just because neglecting anti-rotational before rotational. It seems so simple, but I digress. Our conclusion. Okay, so sagittal. When it comes to the rectus femoris, the muscles directly in the front, and their hypertrophy and thickness, sagittal plane movements are king. Crunches, sit-ups, toe touches, even the specialty piece of equipment with the board and the wheels. I thought that'd be great. An ab wheel, which sucks, but it is great for targeting the rectus femoris, right? As far as your oblique muscles, it's really not so much. It hardly stable or hardly stimulates them, as the EMGs have shown in all articles. So with the anti-rotational, the greatest spine stabilizer, uh, as we said before, it is the greatest on the oblique hypertrophy, right? You'll want to get proficient anti-rotational before you jump into rotational. do the things that prevent injury before you even have the chance to do anything that can cause injury, right? So moving into rotational, has the highest torque, the most risk, but it has the greatest effect on spinal flexibility, right? So its greatest detriment is also its greatest strength, okay? A lot of injury can go with twisting at the hips, as I've stated a million times before, but twisting at the hips is how you actually get your spinal flexibility. How are you going to be flexible if you've never been in that range before, right? So, core training, like any other exercise, is multiplanar, right? You want to train every single direction, preferably sagittal first, then your anti-rotational, and then your rotational movements, just so that you do not risk the injury, right? Each each movement category trains unique biomechanics. An example of that would be the movement arm being so much longer in something like a Pallof press, where the load is away from your body, as opposed to like the crunches, where the load is literally inches away from your center of gravity, or your abdomen in this case. So obviously, balance programming improves stability, strength, and performance. A well-rounded athlete of any caliber, any level, any sport, they should do all of these movements, because without a strong core, everything else falls apart, right? That's why it's the core. But anyways, here are my 10 sources that I used. I found this presentation, or the research of the presentation. I had a lot of ups and downs, right? It seemed, when I was looking at just rotational versus sagittal, there was not a whole lot of research. I mean, there was enough research, but not as much as I would like. So I added in anti-rotational, and I feel like that gave me much more of a perspective on programming properly, right? Because you would use anti-rotational before the rotational movements. So I feel like that was a great move for me. Ups and downs like any research, but overall, I'm happy I did this. And yeah, so thank you for your time. Have a great rest of your day, and see ya.